Coming up is my pre-owned buyer's guide for the 2015 through 2024 Indian Scout models. So if it's something you're interested in, stick around and check it out. Welcome back to the channel for episode 5 of the Ranch Motorcycle Podcast. I am your host, Mike, and in today's episode, we are going to go into what I consider to be my buyer's guide for the 2015 through 2024 Indian Scout models. There's a bunch of variances, a bunch of changes over the years. I would consider that to be Gen 1 for the liquid-cooled Scout models. Obviously, in 2025, Indian redesigned a bike, went to a 1250 on the motor. So that means there's a bunch of bargains that can be had currently on the previous generation of liquid-cooled Scouts. So this is going to be a buyer's guide on what to look out for. And there are a ton of bargains to be had out there, especially if you live in states with cold winters. Now's the time to buy before the weather turns warm. First off, why would anybody want to listen to what I have to say about it? Well, that's a very good question. A little bit of background about me. I have a degree in electronics engineering. I spent 26 years in telecommunications working on mobile phone technology. So I'm a certified motorcycle technician. And I completed and went through the Polaris Indian Motorcycle Certified Service Training Program. And I also worked as a service advisor at an Indian motorcycle dealership. I have seen a ton of Scouts come through, both new and used, the service department for regular service and warranty. So I think I have a little bit of a background to understand what I'm talking about. I've owned a Scout 60, and if you're on this channel for the first time, go look at the back catalog. I've got a ton of videos on my own personal Scout 60 that I bought brand new in 2016, and I still have it, and I love it. So I've got a good perspective and a good background to give you some good advice and some good tips on what to look for to get a really fun bike for good money. First step that you want to do here before you go and you get on Marketplace or Craigslist or Cycle Trader or wherever you're looking for your used Scout, I would go to Indian's actual website. It is called the Indian Motorcycle Model Archive. You can find this either through a Google search or poking around on the website. It's a little hard to find on the website, so if you just Google Indian Motorcycle Model Archive, you will find this. It'll have the 25 and the previous year model. So if it's 26 or 27, it'll have the previous year model configurator on here. This is the 23 through 2014 Indian Motorcycle, model archive. This is the current modern iteration of Polaris / Indian motorcycles. 2015 is going to be your first year for the Scout. Just click on the year range here and look for midsize. You can see on the website exactly what came on what year. And you can go into pretty good detail about each bike. You may not know this if you're not familiar with the Indian brand, but anytime Indian says smoke, they mean flat or satin. That's their term for whatever finish, whatever color that is not glossy. They look cool, but they're hard to maintain because if you polish it too much, you'll put shiny spots on it. If you don't use the right type of cleaner with it, you'll put shiny spots on it. If you don't use the right type of quick detailer spray, you'll put shiny spots on it. So it's a little harder to maintain, and also to do touch-ups for chips. When you have a glossy color, you could always wet sand it, do a color correction, and polish it back. So it makes reconditioning a bike with a satin finish a little bit more difficult. So again, you can come through for each model. We'll start in 2015, first year for the Scout. You can come in here and you can see all kinds of information. I would recommend highly going through each year and kind of just eyeballing the color combos to see what you like and what you don't like. And keep in mind, Indian still sells accessories for these bikes, like a bikini fairing, for example, along with the mounting kit, or like their Batwing fairing as factory accessories that you can order in color, and they have the colors back catalog. Fun fact about Indian Motorcycle is most of the time they don't keep painted parts in inventory. They have a paint shop that will color match the part and send it out. So if you want a color matched part, you can get it, but keep in mind it might take you a little while to receive it because it's going to get painted and it gets put in line with the rest of the stuff that comes through the paint shop. You can also get touch-up paint from the factory in quartz, and all of the things that you need to do the touch up on any of these colors that you're looking at here on the model archive. So if you find a good bargain, but maybe it's got a little bit of damage on it, don't freak out. You can get painted parts from the factory, or you can get the paint and have one of your painters do it, unless you can find a shop that can paint match really well. Some key points in time to keep in mind when it comes to shopping for Scouts. First off, we know 2015 is going to be the first year. It was only the 69 cubic inch 1133. I wouldn't worry about buying first year bikes. Polaris/Indian is very good in introducing new models that have had a lot of durability testing done to them. They're liquid cooled double overhead cam motors. It's a shared oiling system. So you don't have like a separate primary oil versus a separate transmission oil versus an engine dry sump. It is all one oiling system, even though there are two plugs. That's just to make sure you can drain all of the oil out of the system. It's very modern. It's basically built like a car with two wheels in reality. In 2016 is the first year for the 60. So the 60 is 999 cc's versus 1133. You can go on the model archive and you can see the differences of all the specs, but just the basics of it is it's a slightly smaller motor. It's detuned a little bit, not just a smaller bore and stroke. And they also removed one of the gears. But if you look at the gear ratios online, they're identical. What they did is they took the fifth gear and removed it out of the trans, and then sixth gear became fifth gear. That jump between fourth and sixth, which is technically the fifth in the Scout 60, isn't a big enough leap that like when you're riding a 60 and you shift between those gears, the motor lugs or has some big jump, RPM wise. Honestly speaking, on an 1133 Scout, if you really got to hammer it, if you're in sixth and you're going down the freeway and you want to pass somebody, you're going to end up dropping two gears anyhow. That fifth gear is in a weird position. I mean, it is usable, but it's you're not going to miss it that much in a 60 is what I'm saying. And if you can get a really good deal on a Scout 60, I would go for it any day of the week. That's why I bought mine. So one of the phase periods of production for the first generation liquid cooled Scouts would be 2015 through 2017. Other than the introduction of the Scout 60 and slight changes in colors, they're virtually identical. The cool thing about the earlier Scouts is that some of the things that they changed later, like the 60s lost the little covers, decorative covers on the side of the motor. 60, when it was introduced, didn't have the wire cover on the upper triple clamp. You can get that from the dealership. It's very easy. I've got a video on buying it and installing it. It's like 2 bolts and some lock washers and whatnot, and it's an easy upgrade. It does make a difference. It looks better with that cover, is what you're looking at for that very the first 3 years. Essentially, you have these different phases of production of the liquid cooled Scout, the first generation liquid cooled Scouts. 2015 through 2017, virtually unchanged other than colors. Introduction of Scout 60. All right. So 2018 through, we'll say 2020. So in 2018, you have a bobber that is introduced. The Scout bobber is introduced for the first time in 2018. 2020 is a pivotal year, I would say. A bunch of stuff happened in 2020. In 2020, you get the bobber 60. You also get the bobber 20, which is a Scout bobber with an 1133, but it comes with mini apes. It has a little bit different styling. You have wire wheels, which used to just be an accessory. Now it comes with the bike. In 2020, you also have the 100th anniversary Scout. It has the 1920 solo seat on it. It has a bunch of cool features. It's really cool. It's Indian red with like gold pinstriping. It was a 1-year only bike. They're kind of cool. I don't know if they're going to go up in value or not, but from a visual perspective, it's a pretty cool looking bike. I've seen one in person. They're very slick. I believe there was a Jack Daniels bobber. I don't remember off the top of my head what year that was specifically, but if you find one pre-owned, you're going to be paying out the nose premium for the Jack Daniels. In 22, you got the Scout Rogues. You would have a Rogue 60 and the Rogue, and all that was, you had a 19-inch front wheel. Essentially, they were factory mini apes, just angled slightly different, and you had the bikini fairing, which is actually kind of cool looking. And clearly throughout the different years, like we were talking about in the model archive, you have icon colors all the way up through the end of production on the first gen liquid cooled Scouts. Motors were the same, 1133s. You had the 999 Scout 60s. Same gear ratios, almost no changes to that bike whatsoever when it comes to the power plant because it was super reliable. Indian has played around with the frame color and the motor color. The Big Scout has kind of like this, I would call like a titanium or almost like a pewter silvery color to the frame and the engine. And the Scout 60 has always had like a black finish to the motor and also the frame. This matters because if you get one pre-owned and then you turn around and look for accessories, you either get them from a dealership or you try to get those accessories like on eBay or Facebook Marketplace used, you got to know what Scout it came from because the finish might be different. For example, if you take a set of passenger pegs that were designed for an earlier Big Scout with the 1133 and it has that kind of silver pewter color and you put that onto a Scout 60, it's not going to match the frame. You're going to look at it and it's going to stand out, because you need to have the 60 version of it to be black. 2020 is also another year that you want to take notice. I think the braking system got a little bit of an update. Just as a FYI, they changed the brakes. If you look at the earlier Scout, you have a disc rotor that is one piece. And in the center, they have kind of this offset cutout. And the idea is as the brake heats, the metal expands and contracts as it cools, and it wants to kind of move around, right? I have not experienced this on my Scout. I've not really done that kind of heavy braking to the point where I can feel a fluctuation in either the foot pedal or, you know, the brake lever. You would really have to be dogging it hard on stopping to, you know, ride it like you stole it to be able to feel that. But Indian changed the rotor design where they went with what I call a floating rotor. And what I mean by that is if you look at the center, you've got like the centerpiece with these little bobbins and then an outer ring. And that allows that outer ring and the centerpiece to move independently of each other as it heats and contracts. It keeps the metal from binding up and therefore reducing the chance of warpage in the rotor. It isn't that important that you have a 2020 and newer Scout because of the change in the brake design. It's just something I'm pointing out. So when you're looking at them and you see differences, because if you go shopping for a used bike and if you go into either dealerships or you looked at them in person and you see enough of these bikes, you're going to start looking at these little differences and like, hey, why does this bike have this and this other bike have something else? It could be just something that Polaris changed, not necessarily something that the owner upgraded or changed themselves. Really, that's it for the differences in the different Scouts. So you got a lot of options out there for a pre-owned Scout. It's a little confusing. That's why I recommend you go through the model archive and figure out what you like. That'll help you decide, because you can always look at one that may not be the color, the ideal color that you'd like, but maybe you prefer it because it's a better price, it's got lower miles on it, whatever. The main thing is to get what you like first. It will cost you a lot more money in the long run if you try to change a bunch of stuff around. But I'm going to tell you from personal experience, I have dumped more money than common sense into my 60, and if I sold it, I would sell it at a loss. If you're going to do a bunch of mods to your motorcycle, you better love it, which I do, so it's not a problem. Anybody can jump on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or Cycle Trader or whatever the online tool you're using to look for a used motorcycle. Things you need to consider is how you're going to pay for the bike. Cash is great. With cash, you can go anywhere. Just keep in mind, if you buy from a dealership, it's going to cost you a little bit more. It's a good reason, not just because the dealership wants to gouge you on the price. In many cases, they're probably going to cut you a break, and you aren't going to think it is until I explain it here. So, for starters, if you buy it from a reputable dealership, the bike's going to have gone through some kind of reconditioning process. Generally speaking, they'll go through a safety inspection. They'll do basic maintenance, minimum oil change. They'll look the bike over. And a lot of times, depending upon a dealership, I know the one I worked for, we would have a guy that would go through and not only clean and detail the bike, but like wheel out the paint and make it look super shiny like it was brand new. So you're absorbing some of that labor when you're paying a little bit more at the dealership. So they're not just trying to screw you on the price. The availability of financing, for example, you may not be able to get a bank that will finance you on your own as an individual purchaser to a private sale bike. You go through a dealership, they have ways to finance bikes as if they're new bikes on pre-owned. That's what they do. It's their business. The other thing that the dealership's going to be able to offer you is an aftermarket warranty. Essentially, that works like an insurance policy. Now, before you go poo-pooing on that, let me tell you two things about aftermarket warranties. AGWS is who we used to use. I'm not endorsing them, but I'm just telling you that depending upon the warranty company and which dealerships utilize it, sometimes it's as simple as getting regular warranty work done on any bike. Other times it's more like making an insurance claim. In reality, it's always like making an insurance claim. So if you get a pre-owned bike, and you can do this even if you bought the bike yourself with cash, you can still get it set up through one of these aftermarket warranty companies. Just keep in mind, you need all of your contact information for that company, just like you would your insurance agent. If you're out traveling and you have a breakdown, have the phone number, have all of the, policy information, contract information, whatever it is. And keep in mind, sometimes you're going to be paying out of pocket and you'll get reimbursed. The dealer is under no obligation. Like, let's say you bought your bike from dealer A, you go on a long cross-country ride to dealer B and you have a breakdown. Dealer B or shop B is under no obligation to accept that third-party warranty / mechanical insurance policy. Then you pay it out of your pocket, you submit it to get reimbursed. You got to go through their steps. I'm pointing this out because some people don't want to buy a pre-owned bike even if it's a better deal because they're worried about not having a warranty. And in some cases, like with AGWS, when we dealt with them at our dealership, they actually reimbursed the dealership faster for warranty claims that they processed as long as we followed the procedure. It was easier for us to get the bike covered and get it repaired. So in some cases, aftermarket warranties on motorcycles are easier to deal with than the original one from the OEM. So that's a good reason to consider a dealership. Let's look at Facebook Marketplace here. We've got a ton of Scouts. All I did is just with the Marketplace, looked for Scout. I didn't say 60, I didn't say Bobber 20, I just said Scout. Some of these are really super duper deals. Like this one in Toledo is $6,000. For a 2015, so it's a first year Scout. Again, remember I was telling you, I would not be scared about buying a first year Scout because of the durability. I've rarely seen major issues for Scouts. One other thing I want to point out before we go and looking at all of these is that you always can take a bike into any dealer or any bike shop that does repairs and have a pre-purchase inspection done. At our dealership, we're talking 1 hour of labor, which is like $120. They're going to look the bike over. They're going to write it up. They're going to tell you everything they found with the bike. Now, if you got a guy that is unwilling to do a pre-purchase inspection, if you insist on it, that would be someone I'd walk away from. You have to have both parties in agreement to this stuff. Don't be a jerk about it. But if you want a pre-purchase inspection, by all means do it. There's no reason not to. If that scares you, then buy it from a dealership like we just talked about, right? The one that caught my eye immediately was the $6,000 one because I'm cheap. Also, I'm handy enough to know how to do the work myself. Not clear pictures. This one is a first year Scout. Like I said, the durability on these things are great. It looks like they threw some chrome at it. Got a chrome belt guard on a swing arm and the pulley guard. Got the windshield. It's got the bags. I should point out that the very first year Scouts didn't necessarily always have the diamond cut wheels on them too. This has the Maverick Crusher slip-ons there, so probably a little bit louder exhaust, but 3,000 miles on this bike. Let's see, what does it say? Bought a different bike, so this one needs to go. Did add foot bags, a new seat, old seat and bike cover is sold with it. 6,000 or best offer, no trades. I don't know. I'd probably go look at that for $6,000. That could be a really good bargain. I mean, here you got a 21 Bobber 60 ABS with 765 miles for $8,000. What does this guy got? He's got the Mini Apes. He has got the Indian 2-in-1 exhaust made by S&S. Indian's exhaust for the Scout. The 2-in-1 was made by S&S. That is their Grand National exhaust. You can still buy it. He's got some custom parts on here, clearly. You got the Mini Apes, which are chrome. I don't know why you didn't get the black ones. Maybe they're not OEM. So yeah, you could poke around here. And, if it was me and I was looking to buy another bike, like let's say Melly wanted a Scout and we both have Scouts, I don't think I'd spend more than $7,500 on one. I'd look at anything that's $8,000 and cheaper. And matter of fact, let's do that right here. We'll just resort with $8,000. Just to narrow my scope down a little bit. $6,500. It's a 2016 Scout, 1,000 miles on it. This thing's like brand new. Let's see, it's a Scout 60. Again, you could have good bargains on a Scout 60 even when you're buying them as pre-owned. He's got saddlebags, the factory ones, which are spendy. They're expensive. Looks like he's got the factory highway bars on here. It is the white pearl color. Reinhardt's sound good. So here's a bike, 6,500 bucks, barely even broken in, and you've already got tasteful upgrades on it. This would be a bike, if I was going to buy it for me or if I was going to buy it for Melly, I wouldn't hesitate. That's a really good deal. It does have the original tires on it just by looking at it because of the mileage. That might be something to consider. 2016, those are the Indian branded Kenda tires. They are like big wheel plastic tires. They ain't so great. So you're probably looking at about $700, installed, give or take, to put a new set of tires on that bike. But that would be a winner right there. It's meeting the price requirement. It's in good shape. It's got low miles. Here's a 21 with 6,000 miles on it for 7,500, which would be my upper end. Here's a newer Scout. This is a big Scout with the 1133 motor in it, the 69 cubic inch. You can tell by the rocker covers right on the top of the cylinder heads. They're chrome. It's got the really cool two-tone, and that's a factory paint job. I think that's maroon and candy apple red. That is a gorgeous two-tone. Vance and Hines. I think those are Vance and Hines. It's got the Indian floorboards. It's got aftermarket saddlebags. Those look like Viking bags. Wouldn't be my first preference, but something you can easily change. $7,500, 6,000 miles. If you had cash, you could probably talk this guy down a bit and have a pretty decent looking bike. The next segment we're going to talk about here in the pre-owned buyer's guide is going to be common issues, common problems that I have seen on Scouts, things that show up on forums, people complaining about. Believe it or not, it's not a very long list. I've only got a few key things to look out for. Everything else is going to be either something you would consider as maintenance or just cosmetic kind of stuff, right? The number one thing that's going to be on my list of stuff to look for is the dreaded stator leak. The stator is what charges the bike. It is basically a set of permanent magnets and some coils that spin with the motor that induce voltage and current. You have a regulator rectifier that takes what's essentially AC, converts it to DC to charge the battery, and the bike runs off of the battery to run all of its systems, right? The bike is basically a 12-volt bike. It's 12-volt DC. To get the wiring from inside the motor where the spinning parts are that's charging the bike to the regulator rectifier to turn AC to DC to charge the battery, it goes through a little pass-through in the side cover of the bike. So it's a rubber plug. It's molded over the coil part of the stator assembly on the Scout. I think personally why it leaks, it isn't that the rubber is bad or it's a manufacturing defect. My personal opinion is sometimes it's an installation issue. On the ones that do leak, you will see that the plug looks like it's being pulled at a slight angle from where the wiring has to go underneath the bike to meet up with the regulator rectifier. And I think that constant little tug that's on there causes it to leak. So now then, you got to ask yourself, it typically costs, including parts, about $700 at current prices to fix that little leak. The stator's going to work. It's going to charge just fine. If you find a used bike that has the leak on it, maybe it's a good negotiating to say, oh, hey, your bike's leaking oil. I'm going to have to get this fixed. Let's talk about the price. Bring that price down a little bit. In reality, you go underneath with a degreaser, like some gunk and a rag, you clean that off and you look at how often it actually accumulates. Most of the Scouts, it hardly ever drips out. It's just seeping oil. You can just wipe it off and live with it for that kind of money. You can take it apart, which is going to require you draining the cooling system, which means you have to fill it back up. It's a procedure in and of itself. It's not like a car, you just top it off. You have to actually draw a vacuum into the cooling system and pull the coolant into it, or you'll get air pockets and the bike will overheat. So, is a stator leak the end of the world? No, it's not. Most of them only seep. Rarely do they drip. When they drip really bad, chances are you do need to replace the stator assembly, or you can RTV it. What I like to do is I'll actually make a slit down the top edge, facing upward in that stator plug, the rubber boot that is overmolded. Hack in that RTV on that and around where it sits, and then carefully put it in place and leave it set up before you assemble it back together. Then the likelihood it's going to leak again is minimized. minimized. It may not actually ever fix it. Sometimes it does come back. You know, it's not the end of the world. It's easy enough to fix. Most people just live with it. That's usually my recommendation for customers that come through service. Wipe it off and just see how bad it's leaking. If it's just seeping, you know, one drip every once in a while on the floor ain't that big a deal. I think the old joke is the bike's just marking its territory. The next thing that's generally a common problem on the Scouts, the type of coating on the cap for the master cylinder reservoir for the front and the rear brake was not powder coated where the housing itself was. And sometimes the little gasket for the brake fluid doesn't seal properly. There's a little tiny vent there, and if you don't get it square when you put it together, it can seep. And if it seeps out a little bit, it'll cause the finish on the cap, just the cap, to corrode. And then the black paint that's on there just wrinkles off. On my own bike, I ended up getting a set of Arlen Ness chrome covers because mine were corroded. And when I took it apart and looked at it, sure enough, the little rubber boot, the gasket, was ever so slightly off-centered, and it wasn't actually capped right. So a little bit of that brake fluid was coming out, and that's what caused it. And since I put the new reservoir cap on, this hasn't been an issue. It is a known problem. There have been warranty claims on it. I don't think there was ever a recall. Other than the master cylinder leak, there are on the ABS bikes, sometimes you will get the rear brake will become spongy. It won't stop working altogether, but it'll move a lot further than it should. And it is now a service advisory for most of those bikes if it's still, you know, at the dealership or if it's coming through the dealership to be serviced. What they're going to do is they're going to bleed the system. 99% of the time, you bleed the rear brakes again with the ABS system and you get your pedal back. Very rarely does the ABS motor have to be replaced, but it does happen. In the rare instances that there's an issue with the ABS motor and it won't bleed and fix it, you got to replace the ABS motor, which is a pain because it's buried in the rear bulkhead. And you take the seat off, take the battery out, down inside of there, you start finding the ABS system, and it becomes quite spendy. That would be one that I would check. Fire the bike up, put your foot on the rear brake. If your foot goes all the way down, chances are it might have that issue. So it's just something to look out for. If the bike doesn't have ABS, and it's not a problem. A lot of 60s don't have ABS because they didn't come with it standard for a while. So the last common problem that I would want you to look out for if you're looking for a used Scout, you can have moisture trapped under the speedo housing. The bike's kept outside or it's been regularly ridden in severe downpours. It's not always the case, but sometimes water can migrate inside of the speedometer housing. If you see it present on the bike that you're thinking about buying, this is not a reason to not buy the bike. You can get a brand new speedometer assembly in either the black or the cream and Indian red for about $350. It's something you can put on yourself. It's not that hard to remove, and you know, it's just a wiring harness. It clips into it and it goes back in, and you can order it from the Indian dealer, no problem. Just keep in mind, if it has that water incursion into the speedometer, it can create issues for the bike. What I mean by that is that on the bike's internal electronics, it uses a CAN bus system. And it uses the speedometer on the Scout as an endpoint for what's essentially this data bus, like this pathway that the signals travel from one end of the bike to the other that it communicates on. And when water gets into that and it fails, or if water gets into it in a certain way, it could actually cause a runnability issue on the bike. It is rare, but I have personally seen a bike that doesn't run right because of water infiltrated into the speedo. We replaced the speedometer assembly, then the bike started running correctly again. And the issue is on the CAN bus, it was creating a signal issue along that path that the bike needs to communicate to different modules. CAN stands for Controller Area Network. So having a clean network signal is important. You know, it's not carburetors anymore, right? Scout's fuel injected. Is it super common? No, it is definitely something that has been replaced under warranty. I've seen it myself. Just keep an eye out for it. It's not a deal breaker. Sometimes they'll get a little bit of moisture. I would almost say like it's just like a little bit of water vapor in there. That's fine. As long as the thing's still working, the bike runs fine, just keep it in mind, right? It wouldn't be a deal breaker for me. It's cheap enough to replace. The last thing about that is if you do end up replacing the speedometer assembly, the mileage is stored in the speedometer. So you need to find in your state what you have to have as a mileage statement. Keep the old speedometer, you got the new speedometer. You're going to need to fill out some paperwork. You may even have to go to the dealer to get it signed off, or like the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, Secretary of State, whatever it is, so that you keep legit mileage on the bike. And before y'all ask me in the comments, no, you cannot update the speedometer to the mileage that the bike had on it, because then you can set it to 0 and claim you didn't have any miles on the bike, right? You're going to need to have some kind of paperwork to go along with the new Speedo. The next segment I'm going to talk about here in the buyer's guide is going to be maintenance. It'd be really cool if all the owners had records of their maintenance. Not all the dealerships will have a record of maintenance that is done, and Polaris doesn't always have it on their website. If service was done at the dealership, there should be records of information for that bike. Any warranty work absolutely will be in an Indian's website that they use internally to look up the bike for safety recalls, any kind of warranty work that's been done. But regularly scheduled service, generally speaking, doesn't show up. The dealership would have record of that themselves. I would just look at the miles and assume for the most part that most of the maintenance isn't done. Most people just ride their bikes and do oil changes and don't want to pay for other maintenances. I'm not saying that's you. Don't flame me in the comments. I would get a service manual. I would absolutely buy, like, Indian sells them. You can get it from their website. You need to get a service manual. I have one for my bike. They have changed the service manual slightly over the years. Get one that covers your years, and then you have it. Even if you don't do the work yourself, you know what's involved with it. You know what parts go into it. That way, when the dealer quotes you at a certain price, or the shop you're going to, if it's independent, you know it's a reasonable amount of money for the labor that's going to go into it, just by looking in the service manual and say, oh crap, I didn't know they had to pull vacuum on the cooling system to flush it out and refill it. Yeah, you do, and you got to have the right tool to do it. The longevity and durability of these bikes is incredible. When it comes to maintenance, you're looking at oil changes. Easy peasy, right? Indian says that they get done every 10,000 miles on the Scout. In reality, most people do them seasonally, like every riding season, or usually they're done within the 3,000 to 5,000 mile period. Things like brakes, when you just, you can look at the bike visually when you go to inspect it yourself. Just take a small flashlight and just shine it down there between the rotor and the caliper, and look at how much pad material there is on there. Keep in mind that motorcycle brake pads are way thinner than car brake pads. So as long as there's maybe around 1/8 of an inch or less of material still on the pad, that's good enough. You can change those out yourself. It's generally not that expensive to get it done at the dealership. And if you change the pads out early, it doesn't mess the rotors up. That's the important thing, because rotors are pricey. Other maintenance items that generally get overlooked: flushing the coolant system out, flushing out the oil in the forks. The oil does break down over time and should probably be changed. Tires, let me tell you, if you're looking at, especially in the Midwest with the crappy weather, you will find bikes that are getting up towards the 10-year mark, like mine was. I just recently put a new set of Commander 3s on my Scout, not because I had that much wear in the original Kenda tires, but because they aged out and the rubber on them was hard. Look at the date code. You can Google online to find out how to read the date code. Most tire manufacturers for motorcycles will have a standard way to read the date code, which is exactly what the DOT says. So it's easy to figure out how old those tires are. Don't just take people's word for it because they have lots of tread left. Then those tires are still good, because if they're I would say if they're 7 or 8 years old, I'd probably consider replacing them. On a motorcycle, your tires are your life. Don't screw around with it. So I'll never plug a tire. If it has a hole in it, it gets replaced, even though it will cost me. It's not worth my life. Look at the owner's manual. Look at the service manual. The maintenance on these bikes is not that bad. Some of this maintenance that should be done probably might be catch-up maintenance for you. If the current owner, if you're buying it used and you're not buying it from a dealer as a pre-owned bike, if they don't know if it's been done, chances are it wasn't done. I would definitely use that to negotiate the price down to get you a better bargain on the bike. So that's another point about maintenance you should consider. My final thoughts on this are there are a ton of good deals to be had on used Scouts. When I wanted to buy a Scout, it had only been out for a year, and I was getting the first of the Scout 60s personally. If you look at some of these photos here, you can kind of see my journey of from when I bought my bike to all the work that I did to it, to the way the bike is now. I love the bike. I'm never going to get rid of it. And even if I did, I'd never get my money back out of it because I bought it new. It's a different proposition if you buy the bike used. When you buy it used, somebody else has already eaten the depreciation on the bike. It's a great way to get into a really good bike, and the aftermarket support is huge. There's so much available for the Scouts. You want cruise control on a 25? Well, guess what? There's a company that sells aftermarket cruise control that plugs into the diagnostic port because all Indians have throttle by wire. So you can put a really good aftermarket cruise control. You want an external tack? Indian's got an accessory tack. I installed one on my own bike. I got a video of it on my main page. Different exhausts. You can get different types of brake pad materials. You can, there's handlebars, all kinds of stuff that you can get for these bikes now that weren't necessarily available when I first got mine. That is an incentive to want to consider buying a pre-owned Scout. Even the difference between the 1133 69 cubic inch and the 999cc 60 cubic inch Scout 60 isn't that big a deal. The Scout 60 is detuned heavily by the factory. There's like, when you're going wide open throttle at a certain RPM, there's a partial throttle body close. It won't open up all the way to make a bigger difference between the two bikes. So when you do like a Power Commander like I did, or a Lloyd's Tune, or a Power Vision reflash of the ECU, you gain back a significant amount of power. Granted, if you have the bigger bike, you're also going to make more power, but the difference, the delta, how much gain you have is way bigger on a 60. And, you can get into it for a little cheaper. That gives you more budget for, you could put the exhaust on it. You can do an intake on it. You do the Lloyd's, for me, is the best one, and they really know what they're doing with the bike. It's a different bike altogether. It's a night and day difference. So, if you got the money and you want, there are good deals, there are incentives to get the 25 Scouts. They're really cool, a lot of new features. But if you don't have the money and you still want to get up from like a beginner bike, let's say you just started riding, or you're getting back into it, or you're coming back from a big bike and you just don't want to deal with the large, 800, 900 pound, heavy cruiser. You got a ton of power of the Scouts, even the 60. There's tons of tuning options, aftermarket accessories. The sky's the limit. Heck, there are even more tires available now because there's so many Scouts that have been made that you have options for like I chose Commander 3s. It transformed how the bike performs for how it handles. Your tires make a huge difference. There are aftermarket shocks and internals to the front fork that make it handle better. Really, it's a lot of stuff that you can have fun with working on the bike. If you can't do it yourself, then you have the availability to always take it to a shop and have them do the work, because it's been out long enough. Especially with an Indian dealership, they're going to know what they're doing. So I hope you all found this, pre-owned buyer's guide useful information. And because of the 25 Scout, those prices have come down to the point where if you couldn't afford to buy the 25 Scout, you can get into the previous Scout. There's lots of them out there. And if you know what you're looking for, you can get a good deal, good conditioned bike at a good price, and be a much happier rider, knowing that you saved yourself some money and you got the potential to personalize that bike and make it your own. Thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you got anything to add to it, I always love the discussion down in the comments, so drop a comment down below. Give me, the thumbs up and like the video, subscribe, hit the bell notifications. It really does help. I'm trying to grow the channel, but I figured it was pretty good perspective that I have as being a service advisor plus owning a Scout, for like 9+ years, that I could give some good advice. Again, any questions, drop those down in the comments also. And until I see everybody again, ride safe.